Okay, title this The New Deal Part 1. The New Deal Part 1. Alright, FDR is president. Hoover is out. So FDR made a lot of promises for a lot of immediate relief from the Great Depression, which was in full gear at this point as he takes the office. We even waited a few months. Back then we had to wait quite a bit till March 4th. Actually, here's a picture of that, till he took office. So people were anticipating this help. And here is FDR, his two dogs. We'll get to them, Fala and Major. Major had a little bit of a biting problem. First president whose mother was eligible to vote for him because of the women's right to vote now. And he's pulled Pearl Harbor. We know the story there. All right, so his first steps of the New Deal was for a bank holiday. Banks closed until inspected by federal government. It also published lists of people that were hoarding gold and money. List of gold hoarders was important because the U.S. was using the gold standard at this time. So it was basically you weren't supposed to be collecting gold. And in fact, FDR does a very controversial move by confiscating this gold. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later. But very controversial in that aspect. And the gold that is in Fort Knox, most of that is from that government step. So hoarding gold and money was looked down upon. And he also called an emergency Congress. And we now look back at this and we call this the first 100 days. And every president since has been compared to the first 100 days of FDR because so much happened. During this period, the Congress basically rubber-stamped all of FDR's programs. This was from basically March to June, and FDR pushed program after program to provide relief, create jobs, and to stimulate the economy. He based some of this on what he did, what the government did to control the economy during World War I. Okay, but now he's going to go further. He also will take the U.S. off the gold standard. And basically because now we can print as much money as we want, okay, which isn't totally true. You have to have something to base on. But before, you could only print as much money as you had in physical gold. The U.S. would go totally off the gold standard during the Nixon administration. We haven't been on there since. He also began what are called Fireside Chats. Okay, here FDR would talk to the Americans on the radio to restore the confidence and explain the programs. Okay, much of the Great Depression and much, especially of the crash that we talked about, was basically people were nervous. People were panicking. If they would stay the course, things probably would have been okay for the most part. So if we get confidence and start spending some more money to help the economy, things would get better. That was the theory. And he made one of his most famous speeches at this point. Here is my best FDR. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Dead on. But that's what he said. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. Actually, the Great Depression was largely psychological once it began. The run on the banks, that herd mentality we talked about. So he's trying to restore the faith in the economy. The Brain Trust. These are his closest advisors. Harry Hopkins was FDR's right-hand man. He headed up the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, that is for instant relief for people. There's Harry right there. And then a woman, Frances Perkins. She will be the first female cabinet member, and she will be Secretary of Labor. Obviously, during this time, very, very important job. Okay, which brings us to the 3 R's of the New Deal. The 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. Okay? Now, a lot of his programs, you got to remember that although very popular and looked upon now through history in most cases as very popular moves, they weren't necessarily welcomed with open arms. Okay? There were some people that accused FDR of being a socialist, even a communist. He wasn't necessarily a liberal, but he didn't like to rock the boat. But people blame him today for making the United States a welfare state as it is, or basically because of where we are today. And it's hard to argue with a lot of those things because a lot of these programs are still in effect. However, I'll say this in FDR's defense: FDR's programs were supposed to be temporary. And we just never got rid of them long after FDR's been gone. So you can't put this totally on FDR. Okay, but let's go into these relief. Let's talk about the relief first. There's a bunch of letters I'm going to throw at you. Okay, so it's important that you really separate these in your notes, underline them, circle them, or whatever, because we call this actually alphabet soup because there's so many letters here, abbreviations. FERA, F-E-R-A, Federal Emergency Relief Act. This is welfare. Okay, what we know as welfare, that's what it is. This was supposed to be a temporary relief act to give the unemployed a chance to get back on their feet and get back to work, especially during the Great Depression. As we know, still around, and if you watch the news, as we know, people do abuse that. Not all. Okay, it is good for the people that really need that. The next one is the WPA, Works Progress Administration. This put people back to work in construction jobs, okay, jobs such as building public buildings, streets, etc. They employed artists also to paint and sculpt. Okay, these were skilled laborers, and we'll start to see a lot of our infrastructure that still is around today was built during the Great Depression to try to get people back to work. Okay, the NYA, the National Youth Administration, also employed kids. People were desperate at this time. Let's look at the child labor laws. But if a kid could get to work and help out their parents, that'd be great too. So we see that with the NYA. The next one is the CWA, the Civil Works Administration. Now this basically employed more of unskilled laborers, okay? And these were temporary workers. Now the CWA was accused of a word called boondoggling. And this is basically doing work that really wasn't necessary. Basically making up a job so we could put people to work. Busy work, okay? Let's go dig this hole, a 3-foot hole, and then we're going to fill it back up. Those are the kind of things, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but those are the kind of things that went on during this time. Any of you, and we will go to this later, the Historical Society, there are, I think, 2 or even 3 outhouses there. That was built. What you do is you dig an outhouse, and then the government would pay you for doing that. Okay, and very rare that you would see a place with 3 outhouses. Okay, one is, I believe the one that we'll go look at when we go over there is actually a double outhouse. So interesting things there. Okay, the next one, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, also known as the Tree Army. Okay, very successful, still in existence today. The CCC bill was signed March 4th, 1933, FDR's inauguration day. A lot of these were signed that day. He actually did all the work on it before he was even sworn in. They paid you $30 a month and $25 if you got sent home. You would basically live away from home in a military-type organization, barracks, roll call, and you would go around and do different things such as build dams or other infrastructure-type work. And it takes people out of the city and puts them to work in the country. Lots of conservation work during this time, including planting over 2.5 billion trees. Okay, they would also string telephone lines and electric lines. And really, it's that type of work that really connected our country to what it is today. Okay, before, if you live out in the rural area, you don't have those services. But now with this being done, this will help, and it meets a need as well. Okay, the CCC is looked upon as very, very successful, whereas the CWA not so much because of the boondoggling situation. All right, the recovery. The FCA, the Farm Credit Administration, one of the big problems were the farms were being foreclosed on. Okay, this gave low-interest loans to farmers with long payoff periods, meaning they could extend their payoff time so they could stay afloat. It also put moratoriums on farm mortgages. A moratorium is to put an end to. So during this time period, you could not foreclose on farms. The banks were not allowed to do that. And they were suffering from all these things that were going on, from the prices of their produce to, if you look up here, is a picture of the Dust Bowl. Okay, this hit the whole nation. This is the aftermath. Everything's just covered. Obviously difficult to farm in. The PWA, the Public Works Administration. Okay, these were longer-term jobs. Okay? Basically an extension of those other programs that we just talked about, but these were longer-term jobs. Okay, for instance, probably the most famous product of the PWA is the Hoover Dam. Okay, I don't know if you guys have ever been to the Hoover Dam, but unbelievable structure. Also built 2 aircraft carriers, the USS Lexington and the USS Yorktown. Both will be used and sunk during World War II. Okay, but very important structures as well. The Lincoln Tunnel, some other things, a lot of infrastructure and long-term jobs. You know, Hoover Dam was the biggest probably. The AAA, now one of the most controversial ones, is the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Basically, to get the prices back down where the farmers are going to be helped by this. You know, if you have a large supply of something and you want your prices to be higher, what are you going to do? You have to get rid of that oversupply. Unfortunately, this meant getting rid of farm animals and wasting some of this stuff. Okay, over 6 million pigs were slaughtered due to oversupply. And they would just get rid of the meat. You can't give it back to the poor or anything like that, because that's not going to help with the supply and demand type thing. It's all about price and things like that. If the supply is still out there, people are eating. So they would literally destroy this food so nobody would get it. And in a time where everybody's hungry, you can see why this would be controversial. Farmers would literally throw out their milk. Government wanted to increase the demand so that you could restore the prices. So that's why you could not give away the food. They would actually pay farmers not to grow crops. Imagine that. So eventually, obviously very controversial, and eventually the AAA would be declared unconstitutional, but after quite some time. Okay, let us stop there, and we will check out we'll start the next lecture after that. For homework, 5 Q&A, and let's do essential question number 1. What were the differences in which Hoover and FDR reacted to the Depression. Stay classy, Vandalia.